as we've seen in the first chapter of Mark, Mark packs a lot of material into his chapters. And this is true of chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 2 begins with Jesus returning to Capernaum, which is now described as Jesus' home. Capernaum was a fishing village on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And this was a fairly sizable village, maybe 1,000 people, maybe a little bit more. So again, we are told Jesus goes to Capernaum. And then what we are given in Mark's gospel is a series of controversies. Controversies that Jesus has with the Pharisees and the scribes. These controversies, they are stacked one on top of the other. And each one demonstrates the superiority of Jesus' teaching, and they reveal something about the nature of Jesus and his ministry. Remember, Mark wants us to see Jesus as the Messiah. This claim was made very clearly in chapter 1, and it continues into chapter 2 and 3. So as you read these controversies, read each story separately and reflect on its meaning. Don't just rush through these stories. The first controversy, which you're going to discuss in your small group this week, is the story of Jesus healing the paralyzed man. And in particular, the scribes are really upset when Jesus claims to forgive the man's sin. Who can forgive sins but God alone? That's what they ask. That's a clue, by the way, about Jesus' identity. In the next story, Jesus is confronted about eating with tax collectors and sinners. In the next story, Jesus is confronted about why his disciples do not fast. In the next story, the Pharisees confront Jesus about why his disciples break the Sabbath. And in the last story of controversy, they condemn Jesus for healing on the Sabbath. Now, as these confrontations continue to happen, there's an increase in hostility. So much so that at the end of these controversy stories, those in authority decide that they want to kill Jesus. And this is only the beginning of the 3rd chapter. We've got a long way to go in the story, but they've already made their decision. Already there is this group that is radically opposed to him. Mark wants us to see that the coming of God's reign in Jesus, it does bring healing and forgiveness, but it also creates confrontation. It creates enemies, those who will ultimately have Jesus killed. And I think it's worth reflecting on this question, why does Jesus meet this type of opposition? I mean, try to see Jesus from the perspective of the scribes and the Pharisees. What is it about Jesus that causes division and confrontation? And do we see this playing out today? Maybe even in our own lives, in our own hearts. Now, at this point, Mark makes a shift. In verse 7 of chapter 3, we're told that Jesus leaves Capernaum and goes to the sea. Maybe you can think about it as him taking a little vacation of sorts. He's got to get out of Capernaum, all that controversy. But here something important happens. Jesus appoints his 12 disciples. And this is important because his disciples will have a special share in Jesus' ministry. But more than this, they will become Jesus' family. We see this in 2 episodes that are linked together. There is this dispute that arises, another controversy, over the source of Jesus' power to exorcise demons. You know, it's interesting, the authorities, didn't question if Jesus could exorcise demons. That was clear to them. What they questioned was where was he getting this power? From Satan or from God? Again, this question, who is Jesus? But then there's this second story woven into this one we've just talked about. In the midst of all this, Jesus' family comes to restrain him. They've heard about what is happening. And we're told that when Jesus hears that his family is looking for him, Jesus asks the question, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" What a fascinating question. I mean, ponder that question for your own life. And then Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." The most important characteristic of the disciple is devotion to God. And their devotion creates a new type of family. Looking at chapters 2 and 3, we see Mark using these stories to teach us about Jesus, but also to define the disciples and to create some distance between the Jewish community and this new community, this new family that Jesus has created.